The sky was burning red as smoke rose from the battlefield. Screams echoed in the distance, and broken machines lay scattered on the black soil. Among the dust and blood, soldiers shouted, cheered, and dragged prisoners behind them. One of those prisoners was her, a young alien girl with silver hair and tearful golden eyes. She was no warrior, no threat, just a girl wrapped in chains. Her body bruised, her voice silent. They brought her forward like an object. "This one's for you, Captain." A soldier laughed, kicking the girl forward. "She's your reward." Captain Carter looked down. She fell at his feet, trembling, hands tied behind her back. Thin clothes torn and dirty. The others laughed. Again, walking away, leaving her like a broken doll in the mud. Carter didn't laugh. He didn't move. He just stared, confused, angry, not at her, but at them. She didn't lift her head. She thought it was over. She thought he would be like the others. Rough hands, cruel orders, no mercy. But Carter knelt down, slowly. He placed a water bottle near her lips. She flinched, afraid, expecting pain, but his voice was calm, low. "You're thirsty, aren't you?" He said. She looked up, barely, her golden eyes dull and empty. Then she took a sip, hands still tied. She didn't say thank you. She didn't know if she was allowed to speak. He watched her. This girl, this prisoner, was not much older than 20, skin marked by chains, hair full of dust, yet her face, under the dirt, was beautiful. Not in a way that begged for attention, but in a way that made silence fall. He stood up and turned to the others. "Untie her," he said. The soldiers stared. "She's your prize, Captain," one joked. "Or do you prefer the male ones now?" Carter said nothing. He walked back to his tent, and when she didn't move, he looked back. "You can walk," he said. "You're not a thing." The girl stood slowly, her legs shaking. She followed him inside, confused, cautious. He didn't chain her to the wall. He didn't shout or give her orders. He handed her a blanket. "Sleep," he said. Then sat at the other end of the tent, cleaning his weapon. She lay curled on the ground, too afraid to close her eyes, but sleep came. Anyway, heavy and deep, that night she dreamed of the past of her village. Her mother's voice, the scent of home. She woke up with a gasp, her hands reaching out. But all she touched was dirt. Carter was already awake. He didn't look at her, but he spoke. "You're safe here," he said quietly, "at least." "With me?" She didn't believe him. She couldn't. Kindness was a trick she had seen before. Kindness led to pain. But still, he brought her food. Real food, not scraps. He didn't touch her, didn't ask her name. He let her eat in silence, as if she were human. One soldier peeked into the tent and grinned. "You enjoying your prize, Captain?" Carter's eyes turned cold. "Say that again, and I'll break your jaw," he said. The soldier laughed and walked off. But the girl, she had heard that tone. It wasn't anger for her, it was anger for them. That confused her more than anything. Later, when the sun burned the sky outside, Carter gave her clean clothes. She stared at them like they were made of gold. He looked away as she changed, giving her the one thing no man had given her since capture: privacy. She couldn't understand him. She didn't trust him, but something in her heart began to wonder, who was this man, this human, who treated the spoils of war like she mattered? That night, she didn't curl up far from him. She sat a little closer, the blanket over her legs. And as he lay down to sleep, she whispered her first words in days. "Why are you different?" He didn't open his eyes. "Because I've seen enough monsters in this war," he said. "I won't become one." She didn't reply, but in the quiet, with stars above and chains forgotten on the ground, she stared at him, unsure. Maybe he was lying, or maybe he was the first human who didn't see her as a prize. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't a captive anymore. Maybe her story was just beginning. The campfires flickered under the cold night sky. Laughter echoed from the soldier tents, filled with talk of victory and drinks. But in Carter's tent, there was only silence. He sat on one side, polishing his boots. She sat on the other, wrapped in a blanket, barely breathing. Watching him like a cornered animal, her name, still unspoken, floated between them like smoke. She hadn't told him, he hadn't asked, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't want to force her outside. Men whispered and laughed. She's got soft skin. I bet the captain's having a great time with her. Strange guy, not even touching his prize. Maybe she's not his type. Carter heard it all, but he didn't say anything. He just looked at the girl and noticed the way she pulled the blanket tighter every time someone passed by. She didn't need more fear. She needed peace. Even if just for one night, he laid out a ration pack near her and a small flask of clean water. "No one will come in," he said. "I locked the flap from inside." She nodded slightly, but didn't. "Touch the food." Carter raised an eyebrow. "It's not poisoned," he said with a small shrug. "It's dry and tastes like cardboard, but it won't kill you." After a long moment, she reached out, slow like a ghost, and took a bite. Chewed carefully, then looked at him again. Her eyes were sharp this time, not empty curious, maybe suspicious. "You're not like them," she said in a voice barely. Above a whisper, "You didn't chain me again. You didn't." "Use me." Carter looked away, then sighed. "You've been through hell," he said. "Why would I add to it?" She lowered her head, not sure what to say. This was all so strange. Men like him were supposed to be cruel. That's what she had learned. That's what they had proven again and again. But this one? This human soldier was breaking the rules she had memorized to survive. "You confuse me," she said softly. "You're confusing me too." He replied a beat past, and then Carter leaned back against his pack and closed his eyes. "I won't touch you," he said without looking at her. "I don't want anything from you. I just don't want to see you suffer." Her hands trembled under the blanket. No one had ever said something like that to her, not since the war started. She blinked fast, trying to stop the tears that wanted to rise. She couldn't trust this. She shouldn't trust him, but part of her wanted to. The next morning, Carter stepped out to get more rations. When he returned, he found her cleaning the corner of the tent, stacking the used packs neatly, folding the blanket, wiping the floor with a torn cloth. He froze for a second. Surprised. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she replied quietly, "but I wanted to." That stunned him more than any battle he had fought. Later that day, Lieutenant Gray entered the tent without knocking. He stared at the girl, then at Carter, smirking. "Still haven't had your fun, Captain?" Carter stood up fast. "Get out," he said firmly. Gray laughed. "Relax. She's just a war prize. Or did she cast a spell on you?" Carter stepped closer, his voice low but sharp. "She's not a thing," he said. "And I don't want to hear that again." Gray raised his hands. All right. Have fun being a priest." And walked off, chuckling. The girl had watched the entire thing, her hands shaking, her heart pounding. He had defended her not just silently, but loudly, and for the first time in a long time. She felt something strange, safety, that night. She moved a little closer to his bedroll, still not touching, still scared, but close enough that her breathing could be heard. He didn't react, just stayed still. His eyes closed, but he could feel the change. "Thank you," she said, surprising even herself. "I don't understand you, but thank you." Carter opened his eyes and turned slightly toward her. "When you're ready to tell me your name," he said, "I'll be here." She stared at him for a long time, then whispered, "Syrah." He nodded once. "Nice to meet you." "Syrah," he said, and went back to sleep. And in that quiet space between war and peace, between prisoner and protector, a fragile connection had begun, one that neither of them understood yet, but one that neither of them would forget. The camp was quiet that night. Most soldiers had gone to rest, their laughter gone, replaced by the soft hum of cooling machines and distant animal howls inside Carter's tent. The light from the small lantern danced across the walls. Sierra sat near the entrance, wrapped in her blanket, pretending to sleep. But her eyes were open, alert, and filled with thoughts she couldn't ignore anymore. 3 nights had passed since she had been given to him. 3 nights with no chains, no cruelty, no threats. But that only made her more afraid. What if it was a trick? What if he was just waiting for her to let her guard down? She had seen it before. Kindness that turned into punishment. Smiles that led to pain. So tonight, she had made up her mind. She would run. Even if the forest outside was cold, even if she had nowhere to go, she would rather die in the wild than wild then. Become someone's property again. Carter lay asleep on his bedroll, his chest rising slowly, his weapon beside him as always. But Sierra had learned how to move silently. She had learned long ago how to slip out without being heard. She crept to the entrance of the tent, barefoot and careful. The cold air hit her face like a slap. But she didn't stop. She stepped outside into the dark. The stars above watching her closely. The guards were far from this corner of camp. She had seen that earlier, memorized their steps, their rotations. She moved fast, but low, using shadows like old friends. Her heart raced as she slipped past the sleeping carriers, the fuel tanks, the broken mechs, and then freedom, the open field beyond the ridge. Beyond that was the forest, wild and dangerous, but free. She ran. Her legs still weak, but determined. Every step away from the camp felt like a breath of life. But then, a voice behind her, calm and steady. Sierra? She stopped instantly. Her name. He had said her name, not shouted, not threatened, just called. She turned slowly, breathing hard. Carter stood near the top of the hill. Not far behind. He wasn't holding his weapon. He wasn't even running. He just stood there, arms relaxed, watching her. "I'm not stopping you," he said. "If you want to leave, you can." She stared at him, confused. No one had ever said those words to her before. No one had ever meant them. "I just want you to know something," he said, his voice carrying in the wind. "You're not my prisoner." Sierra, her breath caught in her chest. The wind blew her silver hair across her face. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why? Why would you let me go?" "Because," he said, "keeping you here against your will would make me no different than the monsters who gave you to me." Sierra looked down at her hands. They were shaking. Not from fear, but confusion. This wasn't how escape worked. This wasn't how captors acted. Carter took one step closer. Not fast, not threatening. "I'm not asking you to trust me," he said, "but I promise I won't hurt you." She blinked, the wind stinging her eyes. Then she looked past him, toward the forest, the unknown, and then back to him. He was still waiting, still open, not holding her back, not forcing her to stay. She took one step back, then another, then paused. Something pulled at her chest, a strange ache. A voice inside that whispered, "You're already free." And suddenly her knees gave out. She dropped into the cold grass. Covering her face, tears streamed down, hot and fast. Carter didn't move for a moment. Then he walked forward, carefully, sat down beside her, far enough to give her space, but close enough for her to know he was there. "I thought if I ran," she sobbed, "I could forget." "Everything you don't have to forget," he said softly. "You just need time to heal." They sat there in the darkness, 2 broken souls under the stars. Sierra wiped her face with trembling hands. "I don't know how to believe you," she said. "I don't even know how to believe myself anymore." "You don't have to," he said. "Not yet." She looked at him, really looked this time, and what she saw wasn't a soldier or a captor. It was just a man, tired, kind, and honest. Slowly, she stood up. She took a deep breath. And then she did something she hadn't done in years. She reached out and took his hand. He didn't squeeze it, didn't pull her closer. He just held it, gently. Like she was something precious, not broken. They walked back to the tent together. No chains, no orders, no fear. Just two strangers walking the same road, one step at a time. The wind outside howled softly through the broken metal poles of the camp. The fires had burned low, and most of the soldiers slept without care. But inside Carter's tent, the silence felt heavier than the air. Sierra lay curled in her blanket. Her back to him, her shoulders tense even in sleep. It had been 2 days since she tried to escape, 2 days since she came back on her own. Since then, she had barely spoken. She accepted food, cleaned the tent, sat quietly near him, but her eyes never rested. She was in a body that never truly relaxed, even when asleep. Her hands were curled like she was ready to defend herself. Carter stayed up that night, sitting by the low lantern. His rifle across his lap, not because he expected danger from outside, but because of the pain he heard in her breathing. She twitched in her sleep, like someone being hunted in a dream. Then, suddenly, she whimpered. A broken sound, followed by a small gasp. Then she whispered something not in English, but in her own alien tongue. A soft, pleading word that cracked Carter's chest open. He didn't understand the language, but he understood pain. He had heard men cry like that before in the battlefield, under surgery or while dying. And now, this girl, who had been silent for so long, was weeping in her sleep like a child lost in the dark. He didn't wake her. He didn't touch her. He just sat there, watching, his fists tight with helplessness. She turned suddenly, a sharp jerk, her face now in the dim lantern light. Tears rolled down her cheeks, even as she slept. Her lips moved again, whispering something that sounded like stop or don't, and Carter felt something inside him twist. He leaned forward and gently placed the folded blanket over her more carefully. Then whispered softly, "You're safe here, Sierra. You're not there anymore. I promise." Maybe she didn't hear him, or maybe she did, but her breathing slowed a little, and her body loosened, just a bit. Enough for Carter to finally rest his head against the tent wall and let his eyes fall shut. But he didn't sleep. Not really. He stayed half awake, listening. In case the nightmares returned, morning came with a quiet, gray light. Sierra sat up slowly, eyes puffy and red. She didn't say anything at first, just looked around the tent, as if checking to make sure she was still where she had fallen asleep. Then her eyes landed on Carter, who was still awake, still watching over her. She froze, her heart thudded. "How long were you sitting there?" she asked softly. "All night," he replied, his voice low. She looked away, embarrassed. "I cried," she said. "I'm sorry, don't be," Carter said gently. "You're allowed to cry. No one's ever said that before," she whispered, surprised by her own voice. "No one's ever stayed when I did." He nodded slowly. "I won't leave." The silence between them this time wasn't awkward, it was soft, like a blanket being shared for the first time. Sierra didn't look like she wanted to run. She didn't sit far away. She came closer to the center of the tent and sat across from him, her legs tucked under her. "I had a sister," she said suddenly. "She used to sing to me when I had bad dreams." Carter tilted his head. "What happened to her?" Sierra looked down, her voice cracked. "She didn't survive." Carter didn't press further. He just nodded and said, "I'm sorry." They sat in that silence again, this time connected by grief, not fear. Then Sierra said something unexpected. "You remind me of her." He blinked, confused. "She was strong," Sierra explained. "She protected me, even when she was afraid, just like you." Carter gave a small, tired smile. I've never been compared to someone's sister before. She was the best part of me, Sierra said, and I lost her. Carter stared at the ground for a moment, then said, maybe you didn't lose her completely. She sounds like she's still with you, in the way you survive, in the way you keep going. Sierra wiped her face, trying not to cry again. She didn't want to cry anymore, but this time, the tears didn't hurt. They were soft, not sharp. She felt lighter afterward, like something heavy had been lifted from her chest. When night returned and they lay down again, Carter kept the lantern burning just a little longer, and before she closed her eyes, Sierra whispered, if I dream again, will you still be awake? Carter looked at her gently and replied, always. That night, when the dreams came, they weren't as loud. The chains in her mind didn't rattle so hard. And even if her breath caught once or twice, she knew this time she wasn't alone in the dark. The morning sun rose with a strange stillness. The camp buzzed softly with distant chatter and shifting armor. Sierra stood near the water barrel, washing her face, her silver hair tied loosely behind her neck, for the first time since she was brought here in chains. She looked calm, not safe, but no longer just surviving. Carter watched her from a few feet away, arms crossed, silent. He had seen the change in her small. Fragile, but real. She was speaking more, moving with a little more confidence, even offering to help boil the water, fold the blankets, wipe the rifles clean. It wasn't much, but for someone who had been treated like a possession, it meant everything. But peace never lasted long in a war zone. Not when orders outranked kindness, not when the chain of command snapped its teeth. Before noon, a hover transport arrived. Its engines loud and proud, dust rose as boots hit the ground. And leading them was General Ryvek, cold-eyed and dressed in gray steel, a war legend, ruthless, efficient, feared by both sides. Carter straightened as the man approached. Sierra stepped behind him instinctively, feeling the sharp shift in energy. Captain Carter, the general barked. At ease, Carter. Didn't move. Ryvek raised an eyebrow. Where's the captive? Carter's jaw tightened. She's here, he said flatly. Her name is Sierra. Her name is irrelevant. The general said, scanning the tent, she was a battlefield spoil. Assigned to your unit for morale purposes? I didn't ask for her, Carter replied. I never accepted her. Ryvek walked past him, toward Sierra. She froze, her hands clenched, her body leaning slightly back, ready to flee again. I've come to collect the asset, Ryvek said. She's to be transferred to Command HQ for interrogation and future deployment. Carter stepped between them. She's not an asset, he said firmly. She's not going anywhere. The soldiers behind Ryvek shifted, unsure. This wasn't part of the plan. Ryvek's eyes narrowed. Captain, I don't believe you. Understand your position. Oh, I do, Carter said. His voice, low and dangerous. I also understand that turning over a civilian, someone who hasn't committed a single act of war, is not just wrong, it's cowardice. You dare defy direct military command. Ryvek snapped. Carter didn't answer. Instead, he pulled his weapon from his holster and pointed it down but firm. His finger hovered over the trigger. Not shaking, not afraid. The tension exploded into the air like a wire pulled too tight. The soldiers behind Ryvek reached for their weapons, but hesitated. They weren't sure if this was a test, a trap, or madness. Sierra gasped softly, looking at Carter, not out of fear, but out of disbelief. He was standing between her and the people who still believed she was just war property. He was standing against his own command. She's under my protection, Carter said. You'll have to go through me to take her. Ryvek took one step forward. Do you think you're a hero, Captain? He growled. This is a war. She's nothing but a broken alien girl with no country. No value. She has value to me, Carter said, eyes locked. She's a person and I won't let her be taken again. A long silence followed. One heartbeat, then another. The air grew thick. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting for blood to fall. But then Ryvak scoffed and turned his back. "Fine," he muttered. "Keep your little pet. But don't expect command to protect you when things go south." He signaled his men, and they backed off, stepping into the hover transport moments later. The vehicle lifted off, vanishing into the gray clouds. Carter lowered his weapon, finally exhaling. His heart still beat like a drum in his chest, but he didn't let it show. Sierra stared at him, stunned. You pointed your gun at them," she whispered. "For me?" He looked at her, calm but tired. "I told you I'd protect you," he said. "I meant it." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't hide them this time. She walked up to him, slow but certain, and for the first time she reached out, not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to. Her hand touched his arm, warm, trembling, but real. "You could lose everything," she said softly. "You just did this for me?" He nodded. "You're not a thing, Sierra. You never were." And in that quiet moment, under a torn sky and the smell of war, something shifted again. Not just protection, not just kindness, but a bond now sealed with risk, sacrifice, and choice. He hadn't just saved her, he had chosen her. The wind had grown softer since the general's transport vanished into the clouds. The camp felt quiet in a different way, now less like a battlefield, more like a breath being held. Sierra sat outside the tent, her knees drawn to her chest, staring at the horizon with unreadable eyes. Carter stood a few feet away, speaking too. The quartermaster about supplies. Soldiers passed by, throwing silent glances in his direction. Some of them looked with respect, others with confusion, a few with quiet judgment, but no one said a word, not after what Carter had done. He had aimed his weapon at a general, not for a country, not for glory, but for her. Inside her chest, Sierra felt something stir that she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not fear, not confusion. It was something softer, something warmer. Hope. When Carter returned, she didn't shift away like before. She didn't lower her eyes. Instead, she looked straight at him and asked, "Why?" He paused mid-step. "Why what?" "Why would you throw away your career?" She said quietly. "Your rank, your safety, for me." Carter sat down beside her, arms resting on his knees. The sun touched the edges of their faces with soft gold light. "Because no uniform," he said slowly. "No badge, no medal. It's worth becoming someone I hate." She stared at him, her golden eyes wide and searching. "You don't even know who I really am," she said. "I was just dropped in front of you in chains, with no name, no story. I didn't need your story to know you didn't deserve chains," he replied gently. "But if you want to tell me your story now, I'll listen." Sierra took a shaky breath. Then she told him. She told him about the day the human bombs fell on her village. The night soldiers stormed through the gates, taking anything that moved. She told him about her little sister hiding under the bed, about her mother's last words, about the long walk through slave camps, the beatings, the cages, about how she stopped counting days, stopped hoping for anything better. Carter listened without interrupting. No pity in his eyes, just sorrow and anger gnawed at her. But at the world, when she finished, her hands were clenched, her body shaking. But Carter didn't try to hug her or wipe her tears. He just said the only thing that mattered. "I'm sorry." That was when Sierra reached out. Her hand moved slowly, like it was unsure, but it landed on his soft, small fingers, brushing against his skin. He looked at her hand, then at her face. She wasn't afraid this time. Her eyes didn't flinch or dart around the way they used to. They were steady, still watery, but brave. "I've been touched by many hands," she whispered, "but this is the first time I reached out myself." Carter nodded. He didn't squeeze her hand. He simply let her hold his. They sat in silence, side by side. Not as captor and captive. Not as soldier and spoil. But as two souls who had bled and broken, in different ways, and somehow found each other in the middle of war. Later that evening, Carter fixed the tent's torn flap. Sierra helped, holding the cloth steady, tying knots with her fingers. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. It was a quiet harmony, her movements. Slower, more relaxed, his steps lighter, his voice gentler. When night came, she sat beside the fire near his tent. She was barefoot, her eyes glowing in the flame's reflection. He handed her a ration bar, and she didn't hesitate. She smiled when she bit into it. "It still tastes like sand," she said, "but somehow it feels warmer tonight," he chuckled. "That's because you're not eating it in fear anymore." She looked at him again, longer this time, studying him, and then said, "You don't know this yet, Carter. But the moment I touched your hand, I stopped feeling like a prisoner." His throat tightened at her words, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than before. "I know," he said. "I felt it too, in the distance." Thunder rumbled not from war, but from nature. A storm was coming, but inside the tent, under a shared blanket, next to a small fire, they weren't afraid. Not of the weather, not of the soldiers, not even of what came next, because for the first time, their story was no longer built on fear. It was built on something stronger, something called trust, and something dangerously close to love. The storm rolled in by morning. Dark clouds covered the sky, and cold rain soaked the tents of the war camp. Soldiers moved fast, shouting orders and pulling covers over supplies. But Carter's tent stayed quiet, warm inside despite the storm. Outside, Sierra sat wrapped in a thick blanket, her silver hair damp, but her eyes calm. Carter crouched beside a heat lamp, boiling water in a dented metal pot. They didn't speak much, but every movement between them felt peaceful now, natural, like they belonged to the same space. For days now, she hadn't flinched when he stood too close. She hadn't stared at the ground when he spoke to her. She had started to laugh, just once, soft and quick, but it was real. And when she handed him tools or folded his coat, it wasn't out of fear. It was choice, but peace had enemies. And word had spread Carter's defiance, his pet, the alien girl who stayed with him. Some officers called him a traitor behind his back. Others called him soft. But Carter didn't care. Not anymore. Then came the order re-10. Sealed, undeniable. Captain Carter was being transferred. The war front was moving. And he was being reassigned to a new zone. A dangerous zone, where survival was uncertain, and Sierra, being non-military property, was to be returned to Central Command custody. A quiet way of saying she'd disappear. Carter stared at the document in silence. The soldier who delivered it waited nervously. Outside, Sierra sat across from him, watching his eyes move across the paper. He finally looked up, his voice steady. "They want me to leave you behind." She nodded, already expecting it. Her hands tightened in her lap. "I understand," she whispered. "You've done enough." "No," Carter said. Standing, "I haven't." He tore the paper in half, then in quarters, letting the pieces fall to the floor like ashes. Sierra gasped softly. "What are you doing?" "I'm not leaving without you," he said, "and I'm not handing you over again." "But they'll hunt you," she said, standing now too. "You'll be branded a deserter." "Then I'll be a deserter," he said, "but I won't be someone who gives up the one person who trusted me." She stared at him, her heart pounding. "You'd run from everything, just to keep me safe." He stepped forward, eyes locked with hers. "I'm not running," he said. I'm choosing you." For a long moment, there was no war, no command, no ranks or rules, just her and him and the impossible truth between them. Sierra reached up slowly and placed her hand over his heart. Feeling it beat Fast, strong, honest. I never thought I'd be anyone's choice again. She whispered. You're not just anyone, he replied. You're my choice. That night, under heavy rain and flashing skies, they packed. What? Little they had, Carter stole a map from the supply tent, loaded a small hoverbike with food and fuel cells. And in the dead of night, they slipped past the gates together. No chains, no guards, no orders, just two people running, not from something, but towards something new. They rode through the wildlands, hiding by day, moving by night, and though the path was dangerous, though the machines broke down, the food ran low, and the skies never cleared, they never looked back in the silence of the forest. Sierra would lean against his shoulder and listen to his stories. In the freezing wind, he would wrap her in his jacket, holding her close, and in the darkest hours, when her fear returned, he would whisper, You're not alone. Weeks passed, then months. They found a hidden place far from the war, a valley untouched by fire or soldiers. Carter built a shelter with old tools and his bare hands. Sierra planted seeds with trembling fingers, watching them grow. There were no medals here, no ranks, no enemies. But there was peace, there was laughter, there was healing, and there was love. One evening, as the stars lit up the sky like scattered diamonds, Sierra looked at him with a question in her eyes. What are we now? She asked. We're not soldiers, we're not prisoners. Carter smiled. We're free, he said. And we're together. She leaned into him, her hands slipping into his. I like that, she whispered. I like being your choice. And as the stars turned slowly above, the girl once called. Spoils of war was no longer a captive. She was no longer a prize. She was no longer broken. She was loved, chosen, and finally, home.